Hey everyone, welcome back to another webinar, and we are live right now. Don't do many live webinars that often, but we're doing one today, and I'm really excited. We have David here with us from Otterize, and yeah, you're familiar with Otterize already if you've been following my channel. We've done some, bunch of content in the past, but today we're going to talk about how you can get started with securing your services within your cluster rather than one service at a time rather than having like a huge project to roll out network policies across your entire infrastructure. And we'll do some nice demos. And since it's live, we're also happy to answer any questions. And thanks everyone for joining. A lot of folks I see close to 100 now, and we've just started. If you miss it, it's being recorded, so you can watch it later on. We'll do the demos and everything. So if you have any questions, let us know in the comment section. And David, would you like to give yourself a quick intro and kick us off?
Sure. I'm David Simmons. I'm the head of developer relations here at Otterize. I've been here for, I don't know, close to 2 months now, so I'm fairly new. And but I've been doing developer relations and this kind of stuff for a very long time. I won't even tell you how long because it's embarrassing. But I got to say, I'm really excited about the stuff that we're doing here at Otterize. It's really cool. So.
Yeah, and for folks who may not be familiar, can you maybe share a bit more about what Otterize is and this new term you have, intent-based access control?
Sure. So Otterize is a way to basically automate a lot of the really hard things that you do in Kubernetes clusters. And I'm going to say first off that I am not a Kubernetes expert. I have been doing sort of computer networking since, back in the day when it was really hard. And what I found is that all of the problems that we had back then with securing servers and networks and all those sorts of things are pretty much, we virtualized everything as we moved to the cloud and then moved to clusters and Kubernetes. But unfortunately, a lot of those problems weren't actually solved in the process. So a lot of them are still the same. And Otterize has a way basically to automate all of those by declaring what we call intents. So let's say you have 2 services in a cluster and you can declare that service A intends to call service B, right? And so you declare that intent, and then you can use that intent to deploy actual network policies based on that and secure services that way, rather than having to go through and roll out network policies the way you normally do with naming everything and coming up with network policies and deploying them and then keeping track of them. Otterize helps you sort of automate that in a way that makes a lot more sense, at least to me and to other developers. You can do it so the developers can do it when they're writing, say they're writing a new service, right? And they're writing the code for the new service. They can include the intent with that code in the repository so that when it gets deployed, the intent gets deployed as well, and all of the policies get created when it's deployed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, David. And since we mentioned that we're going to talk about how you can start securing your services, there's one question I'd like to ask: why is securing your services within a cluster important, and why might tackling it all at once be overwhelming for some people?
So it's important to securing your cluster is sort of like putting a fence around your house, right? But if somebody gets over that fence and all the doors are unlocked, then the fence didn't do you a whole lot of good, did it? And so securing your services is kind of like that, making sure that all the doors are locked, and not just all the doors on the outside, but all the doors on the inside as well. So it limits the amount of damage that an intruder can do, right? It also stops people from deploying a rogue service into your cluster, because if all the services are protected and somebody deploys a bad actor into your cluster, it won't have access to anything because it won't have all the credentials that it needs in order to talk to the services and steal data, right? So that's why securing things is really important on the services level, not just on the cluster level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so if you're talking about securing services like one at a time, how do you prioritize which service to tackle first? Is there like a criteria
Well,
to consider?
to answer the second part of your question about deploying it all at once, right? There's this idea of, well, I've got everything ready to go, but I'm not 100% certain what's going to happen when I flip that switch, right? Did I forget a service? Did I forget one part of a service? Did I protect the Kafka topics such that one of my other services can no longer talk to it? And so there's that, okay, well, let's flip the switch, and it takes production down because I did forget a service, or I forgot three services, or I forgot that this one talks to this one and this one, right? So that's kind of the why doing it all at once is kind of nerve-wracking, right? It becomes a big project that you have to go through, and you have to make sure that you do it in such a way that when you do enable protection cluster wide, that nothing breaks. And what we're doing, which we call Bite Size Otterize, is allowing you to roll those protections out one service at a time without breaking anything. So you can see what's going to, first of all, you can see what's going to happen. And I'll show you the cluster map that we'll build for you. And it'll show you what your cluster looks like. It'll show you all the services that are talking to each other and how they're talking to each other. And then you can roll out this kind of protection one service at a time. So you can build trust that, okay, the tool's doing what it says it's going to do, and it hasn't broken anything. And I'm not going to be the guy on the, not the employee of the month, but I'm going to be the other end of that, where I'm the person that broke production this month, right? And nobody wants to be that famous.
Amazing, and thanks for sharing, David. Yeah, we'll look at the demos as well. There's one question, which is, what are some of the common security risks that organizations face when not securing services within their clusters?
Well, I mean, data theft, right? We read all the time about, well, a whole bunch of user data was leaked from an unsecured S3 bucket or from some other, vulnerability. And some of that is by not properly securing the cluster, but some of that is also due to not properly securing the services within the cluster, so that, there's, okay, well, I didn't properly secure the cluster, so there was a way for somebody to get in, but all the services inside were secured, so they couldn't steal anything, right? That's that idea of putting a fence around the house and then locking all the doors inside the house. So first they have to get over the fence, then they have to get into the house, and then they have to break into each individual room in the house to get something, right? So by protecting services, all the services within the cluster, you're really you're reducing the number of attack vectors that they have, right? They don't have to just get past the firewall at the edge in order to steal everything. They have to get through, basically they have to get through multiple layers of security at every step in order to get anywhere. And if you look at what most intruders do when they're, even, password crackers, right? They look for the vulnerable things and the easy to attack clusters. Okay, let's say I broke into your cluster, and I'm a bad actor, and I've broken into your cluster, and I realize, oh no, right? Every single service is protected. This is too much. I'm gonna go find somebody else's cluster who hasn't done that, where all I have to do is break into the cluster and I have access to all the customer data and all the financial data and everything else, right? So by making yourself a harder target, you also reduce the risk that somebody's going to attack you, because it's too much work, and there are too many people out there who aren't doing it, and they're much easier, right?
Couldn't agree more. And the next question is basically like, I believe we can get started with the demo to answer this one. So folks are asking, for someone who might be new to this approach, what is the first step in getting started? And yeah, I believe now we can do the demo.
Sure. So it's actually kind of going to be more than a demo, because I'm actually going to build the whole thing, right? The only thing that I've done, let me share my screen here. Share screen. And I'm sorry if I give anybody any sort of anxiety by sharing this whole screen, but I'm going to share my entire screen if I can find it. There it is. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see my screen, right?
Yeah, looks good.
All right, so here's the Otterize homepage, right? And it's declare your intents, not your policies, right? I intend to do this, I intend to do that, and then Otterize will actually build the policies for you based on that. So I have a cluster in GKE and it's here, and I have actually signed up and created a cluster in Otterize Cloud. And there's nothing here yet because it's not connected. Nothing's connected here. And I'll go through what all of that means. But over here, I'm actually running canines. And so this is my cluster. And this is great, but I don't know what's talking to what, right? This doesn't really give me the kind of information that I want. So we're going to go over here, and I got to authorize to G-Cloud just so I can show all this, because it forgets all the time, and I hate doing a demo and having it forget halfway through. So that's done, and I got to set up my key. There we go. So now I'm going to create a namespace for my, I'm going to deploy a demo, a whole bunch of demo code to this cluster, right? And now that I've created the namespace, I'm going to deploy that whole thing. It's basically it's a giant demo cluster, and you'll see all the services go flying by, right? And if we go back and look at canines again, you'll see they're all starting, and it has all kinds of stuff starting up. There's an ad service, a cart service. But again, I don't know from looking at this, is the payment service talking to the order service, or is the front end talking to the checkout service? I don't know from this, right? And so I would have to go and look at the code for each one of those to be able to tell what's talking to what. And I really don't want to do that because that's just hard, right? And I'm not a real fan of that. So I'm going to add the Otterize stuff to my cloud. And it's going to deploy the system mapper, what we call, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Use my credentials. And now this is all, this part of it is sort of automated for me because I don't want to go through the whole thing. But I'll show you how I did it while it's setting itself up, right? So I'm gonna use the cloud to generate my TLS credentials. I'm going to deploy the network mapper and a Kafka watcher so I can map what Kafka topics are being talked to and written to. Oh, I hate that. You'll have to excuse me 1 second. There we go. So I'll show you how I did that, what that's all about. This is my Otterize cluster. And if I click on this config cluster button here, here's that same command, right? The repo add Otterize and all of that. And I can decide whether I want to turn enforcement on. And I'm leaving enforcement off right now because I want to be able to see what's going to happen first, right? So I'm installing with my credentials, and I'm installing the intents operator and all of that. And if I now go to my access graph and reload, we'll see that the network mapper, the intents operator, and the credentials operator are all connected. And if I show all services, it may take a minute. Let's go see how those are doing in K9s. So stuff is still sort of coming up. And this is just mostly because of GKE. Some of these take a long time, and Kafka usually goes into a crash loop for a bit just because it's GKE and it deploys slowly and all of that. There we go. So now I have a map of my cluster, and I can see what's talking to what. And so this is a really helpful thing. Just this is really helpful to me because I don't have to go look at the code and see. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit. Can you see that a little better now?
Yeah, looks good.
Great. So I can see that I have a load generator that's talking to the front end. The front end talks to all of these services, and only the front end and the recommendation service talk to the product catalog service, right? And I can actually narrow this down by just looking at the ecom demo namespace, right? So now I can see who's talking to who and what's talking to what. And so this is the first entry point, right? The load generator is talking to the front end, and in a production system, this wouldn't be a load generator, right? This would be your ingress load balancer talking to the front end. So what I want to do is I want to secure this front end service so that only the load generator can talk to it. So how do we do that? Things are sort of coming up. I'm going to look at the Otterize network mapper, and I'm going to export the front end server, right? So I'll use the namespace frontend.otterize ecom demo. And here it's going to go and it's going to look, and the Otterize network mapper says that the load generator intends to talk to the front end, right? Service, and it calls front end. And this is called an intent. This is what it intends to do, and it's just a YAML file, right? And it says this intends to call that. So what I can do now, and I'm going to move this a little bit out of the way so we can see it happen in real time, is I'm going to apply that intent to my cluster. So I'm going to do that same export, but this time I'm going to pipe it straight to kube control apply, and there it is. And if you watch this little arrow here, it just turned green, meaning if I protect this, it says right now that this server is unprotected. It would not block any existing clients because I've declared my intent right here. So I've declared an intent saying the load generator is going to talk to the front end. And so now I can protect just that one service without breaking anything here. You see these red warnings? It means if I were to protect this, right, the front end would no longer be able to call the cart service, and my whole application would break, and I'd be famous for breaking production, and I don't want that. So if we look at one of these files to see what it says, again, the protecting the front end is just a YAML file, again, that says it's a protected service, and it's the front end in this namespace, and I'm protecting the front end, right? So if we apply that, we'll just do, again, kube control apply with that file. And now we go back, and now I can see that this service is protected. It's protected, and I didn't break anything. My app is still actually running the way it's supposed to because I declared my intent to call this first, and then I protected it, right? Pretty cool. And I can actually now walk through. And again, this is that whole idea of, do I wait until, everything's defined and then I flip the big red switch and hope nothing breaks? That makes me nervous, right? Especially with a new tool, right? I'm just starting out with this tool. Okay, so I did this one and it seems to work, but we'll see that over here, the client would be blocked. Right here, it says client would be blocked because it's a client of these services. And if I protect them, they'll be blocked. So I can go and protect those as well. And I'm going to do it one at a time because I don't want to, flip this big switch. So I'm going to just do ad service intents. And I piped it to an ad service intents file so I can cap that file and we can see what it looks like. And it's the same thing, right? It's the front end. And here's the services, the front end. And you'll notice that unlike the other one, which only declared one intent to call, this one is intending to call a bunch of services. And you'll see that that's all of these services. And I don't want to just declare one intent here, because then when I come back and I declare a second intent, it will overwrite this first one and I can break things. So I'll just declare them all at the same time. So let's apply that. And if we go back here really quick, there you see all those intents were applied. And now I can go and I can protect these services, because if I protect the ad service, I know that it's the intent to call it is already declared, and I can protect it without an issue. So let's go ahead and protect that one. And I have an ad service YAML as well, and you'll notice it looks exactly the same as the other protecting YAML. It's a protected service. It's the ad space, and it's going to protect the ad service. So let's go ahead and group control apply that. And we can watch as the ad service becomes protected, right? And I haven't affected any of my other services. So everything's still running the way it should, and I'm able to sort of walk my way across my application. I don't have to just do this, boom, everything's protected and hope it all works. Let's do another one. Let's protect the cart. And I have a protect cart YAML already, just because I didn't want to go through and write them all each time as we're showing you this. And here's the cart service, and it should get its protection pretty quickly. There it is. Right? Now, I would not know from just looking at my canines of all the things in my cluster. I don't know what's calling what, right? I don't know who's calling what and in what order and any of that. And so again, I'd have to go look at the code. I don't have to look at the code here. I can just go and say, okay, well, what's the next one? The next one is the currency service. So I have a protect currency YAML file, and we can go ahead and do that. And there we go. So I can walk my way through my application, protecting one service at a time, so I can get comfortable with the fact that this tool is actually doing what it says it's going to do, right? And there's my shipping service. And the last one I'll do right now is the recommendation service. And recommendation service is protected. Now, I want to point out something here. There's a green arrow, meaning that I have declared my intent that front end is going to call the product catalog service over here. But I have not declared this intent, right? It's allowed because the server's not protected. But if I were to protect this, it would block an existing client because I'm missing a declared intent here. So I can once again go back and I can declare that intent. And what I'll do is I'll just export it and send it straight to kube control apply, and we'll apply that, and you'll see that that arrow turns green. So I can see at any given time sort of what I need to do next, right? When I was looking at this before, I could see that I needed to declare this intent next before I protected the product catalog service, or the product catalog service would break the recommendation service and most likely break my application. So now I can do the last one. I can go and apply the protect catalog service YAML, and my entire application inside my cluster has now, I've applied network policies to the whole thing, and they're all protected. One of the other things that I did sort of behind the scenes was I also deployed MTLS to this, and that was just kind of done for me. So I didn't even have to think about that. So these are all completely protected services. And even if somebody breaks into the load generator and they can't even talk to the front end without the right credentials and without having a declared intent, because it's protected. So somebody deploys a rogue service up here and tries to talk to front end, it's not going to work because the front end is protected, and it's only going to allow this with a declared intent to talk to it. And it's the same for any other service. I can't deploy some rogue service here and start peeking into the currency service because it won't have a declared intent and it won't be allowed. Do we have questions about this?
In general, we have quite a few questions. So one we have over here is, are there any cases where it might make sense to address multiple services together, even within the incremental approach?
Yes, and you saw me do that when I declared all of these intents at once, right? Because if I didn't want to declare just one intent, I knew that the front end needed to call a bunch of different services. So I declared all of those intents at once. And I could have put the ad service, the cart service, all of these into one protect YAML file and deployed that, and it would have protected them all at once. But being cautious, I wanted to make sure that this thing is actually working the way I think it is and the way I want it to. So I went through and protected them one at a time. But I could easily put all of these into one YAML file, deploy that one YAML file, and it would have protected all of these at the same time, right?
Thanks for sharing, David. There's another question. Can you provide examples of network policies or security measures that can be applied to individual services without the need for a large-scale overhaul?
Yes. So for instance, I don't have the version of this up, but we do have, if you go to our docs, we have a Kafka tutorial. And what the Kafka tutorial will do is actually protect your Kafka broker, and you can protect it on the level of not just the clients that intend to talk to it, but on the actual ACL level, right? So I can say that, this one has an intent to only be a producer to this Kafka topic. And then that client can't produce to any other Kafka topic, right? Or I can say this one is going to produce to a certain Kafka topic, and then it's going to read from a different Kafka topic. And Otterize will deploy ACLs to allow that to happen. So you can actually get pretty fine-grained with how you do this, especially in things like Kafka, where you can say, I want specific clients to only be able to do certain things on certain topics in my cluster. So you can protect things really granularly that way with our Kafka intents. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep. Thanks for sharing, David. There's one more, which is on the screen here. Are there any potential pitfalls or mistakes to watch out for when taking the incremental approach to securing services?
That's what I like about it. is that as long as I am keeping an eye on my access graph, right, then I can see what I need to do next. Remember when I was down to, after I protected the recommendation service, I saw that I had one green arrow coming into the product catalog service and one yellow arrow. So it sort of gives me the visual feedback of here's what I need to do next, right? I couldn't just go ahead and protect the catalog service like I had just protected all of these, because had I done that, I had one yellow arrow that was like, no, 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 not just yet. You have something to do first. And it usually gives you these things. Right now I have no warnings, but before, you'll notice I had a warning here that I couldn't, that had I protected it, this service would have been blocked. So it gives me that visual feedback of what I need to do next, right, in order to protect all of my services.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing, David. We're getting plenty of questions here. The one by Andrew is, do you need a specific network policy tool installed on your cluster for Otterize to work?
No, actually, it turns out. Well, I actually probably shouldn't say this out loud, so I won't. But no, you can work with other CNIs to deploy network policies. Otterize basically just deploys those network policies for you, right?
Amazing. Thanks for sharing, Andrew, the question, and thanks for answering, David. The next one is, what advice do you have for teams that are concerned about the resource and time investment required for this incremental security approach?
So the incremental approach, you don't have to do it incrementally, right? You can look at your access graph like this and say, okay, I know what I need to do, and I'll just put all the I could have declared all of these intents. Basically, it would have taken 1, 2, 3 command lines to export all of those intents and apply them, right? Because I can pipe the output from the network mapper straight to kube control apply, and I could have basically deployed all of those intents almost at once, right? And again, I could combine all those policies in one file and protected everything at once. The nice thing that you can do with intents is that you can actually, since they're just YAML files, you can keep them like in your GitHub repository with the service, right? So the front end service will have all of its intents declared in an intents file with my code, and the YAML for protecting it deployed with my code. And that actually will save a lot of time, because I don't have to go through and figure out how to do that. I'm the developer. I don't have to hand that off to another team to go and make sure that it's all going to work later, blah, 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 right? I can write those when I'm writing the code for that. And then as part of the check-in and the CI/CD pipeline, somebody from the security team can go and look and say, yeah, he's intending to call this, that's allowed, okay, and they can sign off on the PR, right? And then when it gets merged and pushed into the CI/CD pipeline, it all just happens, right? So it actually saves a ton of time and process in doing it this way, because the developer, who knows what they need to, what services they need to call, what protocols they need to use, all those sorts of things, can declare that with their code. And then as part of the pull request merging process, everybody that needs to sort of sign off on it can go and approve, yep, okay, the intents are declared, so, and they look good to the security team, okay, you can do that. And and the deployment team can see, here's what's going to happen. This service is going to come into the cluster, and it's going to talk to these 3 other services, and all the intents are declared. And so when we deploy that, we know it's just going to work, right? So it's actually I would think it's a huge time saver, and not wouldn't take a whole lot of extra time. once you're off and running with this. And again, I would rather have a little bit of extra time up front doing this, deployment, making sure everything works, than being the one responsible for saying, "Yep, let's turn on, protection everywhere," and the service goes down and production is down, and $3 million in lost revenue later, we get it back up.
Yeah, better be safe than sorry. Thanks for sharing, David.
Absolutely.
Believe you answered all the questions, so huge kudos to you. And one last question we have here is, in a dynamic cloud native environment, how does the strategy of securing services individually align with the broader security practices?
I'm not quite sure whether I understand that in terms of the broader security practices. So I would hope that as part of the broader security practices, the policy would end up being every service has to be protected, right? And it takes away, and in I guess pre-Otterize world, that would take a long time, right? Because I'd have to make sure that I test everything every time and make sure that nothing breaks before I even, move it to staging, right? In my dev cluster, I'd have to make sure it all works, then move it to staging and make sure it all works. And then when I move it to production, okay, everybody hold your breath, don't deploy on Friday afternoon. Let's see if this works, and hope it all worked, right? And in large part, I would imagine that that's why a lot of folks don't secure individual services within their cluster, because it's just too much work. And so you fall back to, let's just build a bigger fence, right? Let's build a better fence around the whole thing and hope nobody gets through, because it's just too hard to protect everything individually inside. And the hope is with this, that using Otterize to secure your services individually makes that easy enough that everybody just does it, right?
Yeah. I believe the question was, around, I believe you answered it perfectly, because they're asking about, if you're still there, then let us know. Like the relationship between, like we're talking about securing individual services, and comparing that with a more comprehensive, like a security practice in that particular environment. So ideally, like if you're securing individual services, that's protecting you from certain like vulnerabilities and attacks or whatever. And a broader security approach can be ensuring that all of these services like work together securely.
Right.
But I think you answered it pretty well. If you're still there,
it also protects you from a disgruntled employee who is like, I'm quitting in 30 days. So I'm going to deploy a service and I'm going to steal all the credentials and all the customer data from the currency service so I can come back later and steal all your money. Well, no, you can't, because it's all secured. And the only way you would be able to deploy that rogue service is to get it through the entire CI/CD pipeline and have its intents approved and its calls approved by security. And no, you can't, right?
Yeah. In the like the question is cloud native environment. So, what are these like broader service security practices? For example, we have identity access management. There's monitoring, logging, disaster recovery, compliance audits. So, I believe from what you mentioned, you can, if from properly securing your individual services, you can see that as like a building block for like achieving an overall more secure environment. But yeah, I believe that answers the question, David. Let me see if there are any other. Doesn't look like it. All right. Cool. And we're about time as well. So I'm just going to stop the screen share.
Yep.
Be back on stage. Really appreciate you giving the time, David. Had a lot of fun. Learned a lot from you. Thanks a lot for joining us from your schedule. And this is being recorded, folks. So if you want to recap the demo, check it out. And I'll leave all the links in the description below.
Yep. Yeah. And I am davidgs@otterize.com for email, and I am davidgsiot on Twitter. So if you have any questions or you want to follow along, feel free to reach out. We have some new blog posts about all of this and actually a new video going through doing all of this as well. So if you didn't understand how I went through all these steps, you can go watch the video on our website and see, and basically I did this whole thing in that video, and you can see how I did it, and you can stop and check all the parts out.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Thanks for the questions. Yeah, I'll leave David's socials in the description as well. You can connect with him. All right. See you everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.